Hi, my name is Nicholas Edelman, and today we'll be talking about my ecosystem project. Let's begin. Looking at my ecosystem project, you can see that I have prepared my ecosystem. This is an aerial view of my ecosystem. An ecosystem is comprised of living biotic factors. Let's take a look at some closer factors, or organisms. Grass is the first organism on my list. Grass is a native species to this ecosystem, and it's one of the few primary consumers that provides for most of the animals within this ecosystem. Grass is not an invasive species. Chickens are a primary consumer. They're native to this ecosystem and they're not an invasive species. They feed primarily off of grass, wheat, and corn. Raccoons are a native species. They are not an invasive species, and they're a secondary consumer who feeds primarily on animals that are easy to catch, like chickens or ducks. Humans are a native species to this ecosystem. They're secondary consumers, although they do consume products of producers. Humans are an invasive species. Dandelions. Dandelions are not an invasive species, though that ivy you can see behind them is. They're primary producers, though not many consumers feed off of them. Dandelions are not invasive. Blackberries are a native species in this ecosystem. These primary consumers are loved by all animals who consume them. Blackberry bushes tend to have invasive characteristics, though they are not primarily invasive. Pumpkins are not a native species in this ecosystem. They're a primary producer that provides a tasty treat for its consumers. Pumpkins grow on vines and therefore tend to have invasive properties, and they can kill off the plants surrounding them in their ecosystem. Boxwood shrubs are a native species in the ecosystem. They're primary producers, but they tend to provide more habitat for smaller animals than they do food. Boxwoods are not an invasive species. Strawberries are a native species in the ecosystem. They're mildly invasive because of how they grow, and they're a primary consumer and spread joy and seed for all who consume it. Morning glory is extremely invasive. It's a native species in the ecosystem, and it's a primary producer who creeps into everything rather than getting consumed by animals. The fox is a native species to this habitat. It's a secondary consumer, feasting primarily on chickens and ducks. Foxes are not invasive. Bamboo is not native to this ecosystem. The primary producer is only consumed by pandas. Bamboo is highly invasive because it doesn't have other limiting factors other than space and water. Looking at non-native species, we have 3 non-native species and 9 native species to this habitat. Now, if we go back and take a look at our ecosystem from an aerial view, right here, you can see that it is quite large and consists of many other things that I have not listed in this video. One example as the food chain that I have previously stated is the grass, which is a primary producer, which is consumed by the primary consumer, chickens, which are consumed by the secondary consumer, foxes. The largest population in this ecosystem is grass. Grass is native. It's not invasive, though it does grow quite fast, and it is necessary for the survival of this ecosystem. Part of the community is multiple animals working together. Many animals that work together in our ecosystem are chickens and ducks. They spend a lot of time working together to do things like get rid of all the grass in our yard and stuff like that. The habitat that they live in, raccoons typically live in trees, and foxes typically live in burrows, which means foxes live underground and raccoons live high above the ground. They live far apart from each other because they have competition. The two most competitive animals in our ecosystem are foxes and raccoons because they both feed off of the same easy to catch prey, chickens and foxes. One of the limiting factors for the growth of foxes is the number of chickens available in our ecosystem. I created a food web, which you can see right here, which shows that grass is the primary producer of this ecosystem, which is consumed by chickens, who are consumed by raccoons and foxes. The food web could be obstructed or disrupted by an invasive species like morning glory. Say morning glory starts growing on the ground, and it grows everywhere, like it always does. Now, if morning glory is taking up all the ground space, grass will no longer grow, and chickens will have nothing left to eat, meaning they will die and cause the rest of the food chain to either move on or die in their absence. Species richness is important because it is what determines the number of species in a community. The species richness on my ecosystem is moderately low because it has about 10 to 15 different species, which is not very many to begin with. But the relative abundance of each species or species evenness is moderately similar. There's a lot more grass, though the grass is connected into one big organism. So there's a good amount of production from this small amount of grass. There's a decent amount of chickens and ducks, and less, but still a decent amount of foxes and raccoons in my ecosystem. Communities with higher biodiversity are very important. The highest biodiversity in my community is grass. I know I've touched on grass many times, but there's a lot of different types of grass, and that's important because grass is very good at withstanding different things. As you can see, some of the grass in this image is gray, and some of it is green. Certain types of grass are better at withstanding different temperatures. So the grass that is gray is very good with cool temperatures, while the grass that is green is good with hotter temperatures, which makes it more ideal for a mid-climate environment, because both of those grasses work with each other at different times. We can affect biodiversity by tearing out the grass and putting sod in, or even removing trees. Biodiversity is also important because in cases of flooding or disease, the higher diversity species will be more likely to succeed and continue the full functioning of the food web in its current state. If there is no biodiversity, one disease could wipe out an entire species and in turn disrupt the entire food web based on that. And that is not what we want. It's important that that does not happen. Thank you for joining me in my video today. I hope I've explained my ecosystem systems to you how you expected. Like I said, my name is Nicholas Edelman. I'm an APES student, and I hope you have a lovely day.